Guys, my name is Mikaela Freeman. I am the Systems and Operations Coach at Executive Partners, and I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to you guys about automations within JobNimbus. So part of my role as the Systems and Operations Coach is that I lead and manage the JobNimbus buildouts for our clients. And one of the biggest questions that I get from people is about those automations setup, how we go through that process, and how I optimize those automations within the systems that we are setting up or streamlining and optimizing. So if you are not familiar with automations in JobNimbus, they are automated actions that you can set up based on a series of triggers. So those automations, there are quite a few that you can set up. The most common ones are automated emails, either to members of your team or to the client on a particular job. You can also set up text automations if you have that enabled through JobNimbus. You can set up text automations again to members of your team or to clients. You can also set automated tasks to happen in the system based on certain triggers. So when that trigger is fired, so when the certain action happens, the system would generate a task for a member of your team to be completed. Those are the main ones that we work in. There are a lot of other triggers, automations that you can use. They're pretty extensive. The automation system within JobNimbus is fantastic, and we use them really extensively to make sure that the system is as streamlined and automated and optimized as possible to take as much of the workload off of the team members and put that onto the system so that we can move things faster through the process. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how I go about preparing to set up those automations with my team. So this is assuming that you have already set up your workflows in JobNimbus. So making sure that each of the workflow stages are set up in order and they're thoroughly maintained so that it outlines the process through the sales, production, and billing process that you would take a job through in your system. From that point, what I typically do, I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. What I typically do is I will create a document like this, where I simply outline the workflow stages that we've built in that particular JobNimbus. So in this example here, this is simply a standard set of workflows through the sales process. So your workflow would go through your entire process from lead all the way to paid and closed. But this process here, this list of stages here is just your sales process, just so that we can sort of get an idea of how we build this out. So what I would do is I would write down each of the stages of the workflow. And if I were really working through this process with one of our clients, I would write out every single stage. In this example, again, I've stopped at the approved stage, so the end of the sales process, moving it into production. So I would start at the first step in the process and determine what automations do we want to see in this step. So again, those are most frequently going to be emails, text messages, if turned on in the system, and tasks are the most common ones that are going to go out. So in the unassigned lead task, we're assuming that we have just gotten a new lead. It's been put into the system either by some sort of automation or by a call team or by whoever is taking your leads over the phone, and it needs to be assigned to a rep. So here I might create a task for your sales manager or admin, whomever would be assigning those leads. So let's say sales manager to assign a lead to a rep, right? And then at assigned lead, you could create a notification for your rep. That could be an email to the rep, notifying them that they have a new lead. If you have the text enabled in your JobNimbus system, you could also send them a text. You could make this a text and an email. You could make this just a text. Now, another option that I really like within the JobNimbus automations is that we can set tasks as their own trigger. So I'm going to show you how to set these up here in just a little bit. But so if we have this task that's generated for the sales manager to assign the lead to a rep, So that task is generated. It appears both in that job file and on the sales manager's dashboard. We can set up another automation so that when that task is completed, and that can only be system automated tasks. So only the tasks that we set up through automations can be a trigger. But if we have the system generate this task to assign a lead, we can then have the system trigger another automation based on the completion of that task. So I would write out when completed, job moves to assigned lead status. Okay. So at that point, once your sales manager has assigned the lead and they've completed the task saying, yes, I have assigned the lead, then the system would automatically move that job from the assigned lead status into, from the unassigned lead status into the assigned lead status. So in that way, you can use that task management system to move jobs through the workflow without having to manually drag them or use the drop down to move them through the system. If you are using estimate signatures, you can also use that as a trigger. Estimate sent, you can do the same thing for invoice sent. These ones are a little bit more complex, a little bit more nuanced. So I typically would set those up with my clients. We're not going to go through how to set those all up today, but there are a lot of different automations that you can set up through JobNimbus. But today I want to focus on the main ones, which are going to be status changes, emails, and texts. So again, I would go through each of these statuses in the workflow to say, what automations do I want to go out in these statuses? Now you can also create time delays on these automations. So let's say in the follow-up status, right? Follow-up claim not filed. If I wanted to have tasks or notifications go to my rep every 3 days, every 2 or 3 days, I could set up time delayed automations, email, text, or task that could be delayed a certain number of hours, days, weeks, etc. So I might set up follow-up emails. So hold on. Email to rep with a email with a 3-day delay. To rep to follow up with customer. Okay. I could do 3-day delay. I could do 3, 7, 14, and 30, etc. I could also set it so that if a job stays in the follow-up status, so let's say a status change with a 30-day delay, that after 30 days, this job will automatically move to an at-risk or lost status, right? So I didn't include an at-risk status here, but if you have some kind of like, hey, these are jobs that we might lose, or if you want to move them straight into a lost status after a certain number of days, this is a really great one to help keep your pipeline clean and keep it so that you do not have jobs that are, I mean, I've seen jobs that were in one status of a pipeline for over 2,000 days. So it can get a little crazy if you're not keeping up with your pipeline. So you can set up automations to automatically keep your pipeline clean. And I really like to set up those automations. You can also set up notifications to your sales manager to let them know, hey, this job has been in here for 2 weeks. Follow up with this rep and make sure that the follow-ups are being completed and that this job is being moved through the system appropriately. So again, going through each one of the statuses in your workflow and saying what automations do we want through this section? What notifications do we want to go to members of our team or to go to the client? What updates do we want to go to members of our team or to the client? Do we want any automated moves to make sure that that status stays clean, or reminders to a team member to say, hey, this job has been sitting here for a while. Let's make sure that this action is being completed. What tasks do we want to automate? If there's always an assigned lead, if you always need to schedule the inspection, then we might create a task for the rep to schedule the inspection. right? And every time that a job goes into assigned lead, the rep that's assigned to that job would have a task that is to schedule the inspection. Then hypothetically, once that task is completed, you would assume that that job is now inspection scheduled. So you might create another automation that when this job is completed, it moves to inspection scheduled. And so in that way, you can help to train your reps to make sure that they're keeping up with their tasks, because that will help move their jobs through the workflow appropriately. It will also make sure that that their jobs don't get stuck in a particular status of the workflow, and it will also create a handy to-do list right on their dashboard of things that they need to complete for any given job. So it will keep kind of a running list on their dashboard of the things that are necessary for each job in these workflow statuses. So instead of having you watch while I create these for each and every status that I've put here and type them out, I went ahead and created an entire list of example automations that I might put in this same list of workflows. So we're going to walk through this relatively quickly, and then we'll move on to showing you how we would set up these automations and how to create these automations within your JobNimbus. So again, assigned lead, you could have an email with a 1 hour delay to the office, notifying them that the lead has not been assigned to a rep. You could also have that task to whomever is meant to assign the job, that they need to assign the job to a rep. Again, another 4 hour delay to management, notifying them that the lead has not been assigned to a rep. It's a big deal that the lead is sitting there and not getting assigned, not getting called, not getting followed up, making sure that's moving along. Assigned lead, task for the rep to schedule inspection, and when that's completed, we can have another automation to move that job to inspection scheduled once that task of schedule inspection is completed. An email to the client thanking them for contacting the company and providing their rep contact info. So as soon as the job moves into assigned lead, there's a task for the rep, and then there is an email immediately to the client saying, thank you for contacting us. Here's the information for your rep. We look forward to scheduling your inspection, et cetera, et cetera. Then we can have a delayed email to the rep reminding them to follow up and schedule that inspection. Now, this can be a task, or it can be an email, or if you have those texts turned on, it can be a text automation. And that's completely up to you as to what you feel will work the best for your team. Then a status change, 14-day delay, moving the job to at risk. Again, making sure that we are keeping these pipelines clean. An inspection scheduled, an email to the client with inspection expectations, and again, their rep contact info. So what should they expect from the inspection? Do you want them to be present for the inspection? Should they be home? Letting them know that we need access to the backyard. If there's a gate, that'll need to be open. Please make sure that dogs are inside, etc. We'll be taking photos of the lower elevation, the roof, whatever those expectations are that you want to provide to your client. That can be triggered as soon as that job moves into inspection scheduled, and a task for the rep to add that inspection to the calendar so that your management team can be aware of the inspections that are taking place on any given day or throughout the week. In a needs rescheduled status, so if the homeowner wasn't home and you'd require that the homeowners be there, or if they needed to reschedule for some reason, moving it into this status and then having a task to reschedule the inspection, which when completed would move it back into inspection scheduled. You're probably getting the idea of how this works. An email with a 3-day delay with a friendly reminder to the client to reschedule their inspection. And on that same day, an email to the rep reminding them to follow up. So the client is getting an email saying, hey, don't forget, we'd love to get that inspection rescheduled for you. And the rep is then calling and saying, hey, just want to check in, right? And you could make those different delays if you want. These are simply examples. So I'll just scroll through this a little bit here. We don't need to go through every single one, but you can always pause this video if you wanted to read all of these examples. But you're kind of getting the idea of some of these automations that I set up through this process, right? Again, there are more detailed automations that you can set up through the status of your invoices, the status of your estimates, the status of your work orders, which can all become a little bit more complex and require that functionality or that usage of those functionalities within the JobNimbus system in order for those automations to be triggered appropriately. So we're not going to get too deep into those today, but just using even these basic email, task, text, status change automations, you can create a lot of client communication improvement, a lot of better expectation setting with your clients, and much better pipeline management and accountability within your sales team and your management team. Again, we're just looking here at the sales workflow. So let's talk a little bit about how to create an automation in JobNimbus. All right, so you'll notice here that all of these are inactive. That's because we just went through a migration into a new system here. So we're making sure that all of the jobs are in the right place before we turn on all these automations and starts firing out notifications to our customers, right? So normally these automations would all be active. But so we can add an automation here. This company also has their text automation set up. So there's a text automation button there as well. But we could add an automation. We'll go through naming our automations here in a moment. But we have two options here, event-based and time-based. So if we go back to our workflow examples, event-based would be, for example, the job has moved into this status, or an invoice has been marked as sent, or a task has been completed. These are all actions. Or events rather. The time-based would be anything that has a time delay. You can set many of those same things, but instead of the moment that action happens, there would be a time delay first. So essentially, if you want there to be a time delay on that automation, so a certain amount of time after the trigger happens, then you would pick time-based. Basically, for anything else, just pick event-based to make it simple. So time-based if you want a delay after that trigger happens, and event-based for everything else. So we went with event-based. If you have your jobs enabled in JobNimbus, then it's going to give you both of these options. If jobs is not enabled, then you'll do everything within contacts. Of course, we have tasks, work orders, material orders, estimate, invoice, payment, attachment, and activity. Like I said, you can trigger things based off of the work order status, the material order status, estimate status, and the invoice status, as well as if a payment is recorded. These are all options for the trigger. If we are talking about moving a job through these statuses and the moment that it arrives in, say, assigned lead, an email goes out to the client. So that would be event-based because there is no delay. It is the moment that it goes into that status. So for this system, we do have jobs set up. So I would pick job. So select job. For assigned lead, I'm going to do created or modified. The reason for that is if it's created and immediately put into the assigned status, I still want this trigger to fire off. If it's late enough in the process that it would always have been created and put into another status first, then you can pick modified immediately. But created and modified is a safe bet for anything that's early on in your process. So from there, we can add our conditions. So you can select the type if you have multiple types. This company has restoration, solar service calls, and restoration service calls. So we'd pick restoration for the type. And then for this automation that we're setting up, it is based on what status in the workflow we're using. So the status would be assigned lead. Okay, so if the job is a restoration job and it is an assigned lead, all of these conditions have to be true. If any of these have to be true, we're going to get into a world of chaos here, because then if the type is restoration, that automation will fire. Or if the status is assigned lead, this automation will fire. So most of the time, we're going to go with this all conditions need to be true. There are some instances where we'd use any. This can be a very useful option. As a general rule of thumb, I would say I would recommend defaulting to all conditions to be true. So you can make sure that you know exactly when that's going to be firing off. Then our action would be sending an email. Now, for emails, you'll create those emails first in your templates, and then you'll be able to pick the email template that you've created. Okay. If we were to be creating a task, If it is one of our tasks that we want to trigger something else, so if the completion of that task is going to send an email or change a status, etc., then we will need a specific task type set up so that we can tell the system if this task type is completed, then I want this automation to happen. If this task does not trigger anything, then I can just call it, whoop. I like to scroll down to task. I'll just select task as the type. This is just my generic, not triggering anything task. Okay. And our task here was schedule inspection. This actually would be a automation type or a task type because we do want this schedule inspection task to trigger a status change. So in that case, I would select one of my options here, which I would have named appropriately, and we don't need to find right now, but I would pick one of these that would be appropriate to that task type. Now, when I'm creating those, I'll often notate the task type name when I create it. So probably be inspection schedule or schedule inspection. So that I know when I'm creating this task to select the schedule inspection task type. And when I am creating the status change task, that the automation, the trigger rather, is that schedule inspection type. So in this case, let's say it's going to be triggered by phone call, just to make it easy, right? Let's say that's a task type that we set. We're going to make that be the schedule inspection, right? So we can say schedule inspection. We can select the team member that it's going to. This would be the sales rep, and I could save that. All right. Then I could set up another automation. This would also be event-based because we don't have a delay. As soon as that task of schedule inspection is completed, then we would trigger that status change. Okay. So in this case, our trigger is not the job being in a specific place. It is a task. So the task is modified. Okay. And then the condition is completed is true. So the task will be completed, true or false, right? So yes, the task should be completed for this automation to fire. And then the action would be a status change. Now, parent contact or parent job is only going to be important if you have jobs enabled. If you do not have jobs enabled, it's always going to be contact. It's going to be very simple, easy peasy. If you have your jobs enabled, most of the time your contact status is going to be something along the lines of new, active, and inactive. And so this would simply be only for the cases in which you are changing your parent contact from active to inactive or from new to active. So if we sold the job and we wanted to make the contact active, then we could set that up as the parent job. But if we are moving, or the parent contact, if we're moving the job through the workflow and your jobs are enabled, then the option that you would select would be change status, parent job. Okay, so workflow type restoration, because we're working in the restoration workflow, and the status, we are moving it. Once that task of schedule inspection is completed, the job is moving to inspection scheduled. So we would check this option, save. So the last thing that I missed is the actual task type. Which task has to be true? So we selected phone call as our task type. Most of the time I would name a specific task and assign that to this specific automated task. But in this case, I'm going to select phone call because that's what I picked for my original, and then save. Okay. So if task type phone call is completed, then immediately the job status is going to change to inspection scheduled. Okay. Ta-da. All right. For the email templates, if you're going to send an email, those email templates will live in your templates section of your JobNimbus. You can add a template and add an email here. And then you can create the name, the internal name of your email, and then the actual subject line that the rep or customer or whomever you're sending this email would see in their email inbox in the subject line. Create the body of your email and add template. Once you add the template, you can then use that template in your automations. So your first step would be to set up your email templates and your task types for your automated tasks, or rather the tasks that will be triggers for other automations. So if that task is going to do something, if that task is going to be the catalyst or the trigger for another automation, then we'll need to create these specific task types. So in that task type section in your JobNimbus settings, you could add a task type. You can name this whatever you want. I would recommend, again, in your document, in your automation document, that you note what task type that is. So if we name this task type schedule inspection, do the same thing here, schedule inspection. Now, if this is a task type that will trigger an automation, we want to hide this from the task list. What that means is that when your team is doing their day-to-day in the system and they go to create a task, they can't go in and select this task type as schedule inspection. They can write in schedule inspection. They can create their own that's called schedule inspection, but they can't select this particular task type. The reason for that is because if they select this task type and then they complete it, and we have set up an automation where the conditions are, if this task type is completed, then it will trigger an automation. Then when that rep unassumingly selects this task type and completes it, it's going to fire off that automation, right? So we would want to hide this from task list and save it. Now, the hide from calendar view, tasks in JobNimbus, if you're already using JobNimbus and you're already utilizing tasks, you will probably have noticed that your tasks appear on your calendar in the calendar view up here. If you do not want the task to be on your calendar, you can hide it from your calendar view and it will only show up in the task list in the job file and on the dashboard for whomever that task is assigned. So you can use that calendar view as well. I'm not going to save this because this is an active account. So once I have gone through and set up my task types and marked those down in my document here, and then my email templates, I'm going to do the same thing. So when I finish deciding with my team what automations I want to set up, my second step after creating this document is to go in and for every task that triggers something, I'm going to create a task type and I'm going to write it in here so that I know which task type goes with that action. Then for anything that's an email, I know that I need to create an email template before I create that automation, so I have something to put in there as the action. So then I would create the template like we just saw, and then I would write email template name, right? Template name. And I would put that here so that when I'm done creating my tasks and email types, I've got them all written in here, and then I can start creating my automations and I know exactly which ones I've set up for that purpose. And that makes the job go a lot faster. All right, so the last thing that I want to go over, I know this has been quite a bit of information. There are so many little nuances with the JobNimbus automations. I could spend an entire day training on how to set up each little nuanced automation, how to create these, and how to really optimize your system to the most effective way. If you'd like to work with us at Executive Partners, I'd be happy to do that within your JobNimbus with you. But to train on that in one video would be overwhelming and incredibly lengthy. So to keep this as brief as possible, this is our brief synopsis on how to prepare for and create your JobNimbus automations. The last thing I want to go over is the organization of your automations. Okay, so most often what I see when I come into a JobNimbus account that is already utilizing automations is a lot of random names for all the automations. There is no rhyme or reason for those names, and it's near impossible unless you are the one who set them up, and even most often if you were the one who set them up, to find the automation that you're looking for specifically if you're going back to make a change, if you want to delete or update one, or just see what automations you have in the system. It's near impossible to navigate and find a specific automation within the system. What I typically do, as you can see here, is I have a system for naming my automations so that I can go back and find the automations that I'm looking for and have a pretty good idea of what my automations do. So if I were to scroll and pick one at random, we have restoration production. So as opposed to solar production or restoration sales, restoration production. Roof scheduled is the status that this is associated to. So where in the job workflow is this task associated with? Then I will have estimate ones and invoice ones and work order ones, but many of the automations that we set up, especially when we're first starting in these automation systems, is automations that are associated with specific statuses in the workflow, which is why I've told you to go through and set it up this way. So it'll be which vertical, if you have multiple verticals. If not, you can just do billing, marketing, sales, production, billing, right? Those can be your 4 categories. If you only do one type of offering, like roofing, but if you have solar and roofing, or if you have roofing and gutters, then I would say gutters production or gutters sales or roofing production, roofing sales, etc. So you have your type here, then you have the status that it's associated to, or you could use estimate, invoice, work order, etc. Then I have what action is this going to be completing, right? So we have task. You'll also find in here status change. I'll have internal or client email, internal or client, status change, task, send email, internal or client text are the most common ones that I'll use in this format. And then lastly, after that action, I'll say, okay, what type or what is happening? What do I want to name it? Essentially, the last item is what I'm naming it. So I'll have restoration production. I think we're using a different one, but we'll use this one. Restoration production, roof past inspection is my status. Task is my action. And then the name that I'm giving this is update status next steps. Okay. Let's look at another one. You have restoration production. Roof ready is the status in the workflow. Task is the type of action. And send materials is the task. Okay. And then you can see the qualifications here. So these are my triggers. So if the type is equal to restoration, so not a solar job, and if the status is equal to roof ready. So as soon as a restoration job is put into the roof ready status, a task is created to send materials. Okay. You could look anywhere through the system here. Sales, this is not specific to restoration or solar. So let's go up to the restoration section. Restoration sales. Okay. Working prospect is the status. Client text is the type of automation. And then inspection reminder 2 days is the name of my automation. So that is how I will go about creating these names. So let's use one of our options here, and we can go ahead and name it in that format so that you can find your automation once you've created your list. So this would be, let's say roofing, right? Roofing sales, because we're in the sales section of the process. Roofing sales, the workflow status is no damage. And then what action are we doing here? We're sending an email to the client. So you can just put email. I like to qualify if it is an internal email to a member of my team or if it is a client email. So in this case, instead of just writing email, I'd write client email. Okay. And then what am I going to name it? So email to the client congratulating them that their roof is in good condition and requesting reviews and referrals. No damage client email. Congrats, right? You could name this whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you based on that automation. This last bit is your name of the automation. So you can really put in whatever here makes the most sense to you. But by using this category, status, client email, that's going to allow you to go straight to all of your roofing sales automations, or your roofing production automations, or your roofing billing automations. And then they will be categorized because it'll alphabetize the whole thing. It'll categorize all of your roofing sales, no damage automations together. So any automation that goes into that category, they're all going to be clustered together. So if you had a task and an email and a whatever text that all went out for no damage, and they have different triggers, they would all be clustered together. The system would group them. So you could go straight to restoration sales, no damage, and see all of the automations that go out in that particular status. Okay. So that is a short version of how I name these automations so that they stay organized in the system and I can find them. A little hack to close us out, a little cheat for you, is that once you have named them all in this way, you can, if you're using a Mac, it would be Command Find or Command F. If you're using a PC, it is Control F, I believe. So Command F in my case, and I can search, say, waiting on scope. Okay, if I search waiting on scope, it's going to show me all of the occurrences of waiting on scope. So it'll take me directly to the section. As you can see, the system has grouped all of my waiting on scope automations. So I can see all of them right here. So it's a fast way to go through and find them. I could do the same thing in templates. Control find, let's do waiting on scope, and we have our email templates here. So you can see I named the email templates very similarly. Restoration sales, waiting on scope, client email name. Restoration sales, waiting on scope, internal email name. Okay, so that is a very quick, as quick as I can make it, tutorial introduction to JobNimbus automations. I know this is a lot of information and there are a lot of little nuances that we can get to, that we can get into. Of course, if you do have further questions or if you'd like to have a full automation build out, those are services that we provide at Executive Partners. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you're interested in optimizing your JobNimbus system. Of course, automations is just one little piece of optimizing your JobNimbus. There are so many facets to JobNimbus that make it incredibly customizable and incredibly unique. And we have expertise in updating the entire system and optimizing it and streamlining it to the way your company performs and also to the way that the system can be used to the best of its ability. So if you'd like to talk to us about that, please feel free to contact us, www.execpartners. All right. Thanks so much. Again, my name is Mikaela Freeman, and I am the Systems and Operations Coach at Executive Partners. Thanks so much.